Hey you, it's GM Jim here from Wizards and Wordslingers, speaking truth to power yet again in the tabletop space. Today I'm going to talk about the excellent 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Even though it's nearly 2 decades old, I still think it has incredibly useful lessons for DMs and GMs of other games like Pathfinder. I even think it's better than the 5th edition DMG. It's actually useful, so let's dig in so I can explain why. First up, let's talk player motivations. This section of the book covers 8 player types and how the DM should best engage each one to maximize fun at the table. Those types are Actor, Explorer, Instigator, Power Gamer, Slayer, Storyteller, Thinker, and Watcher. I'll give a brief definition of each one and tell you what the book recommends to get the most out of each one's involvement. First, the Actor. The Actor is your classic RP-heavy player, the one who cares little for combat and puzzles, and instead revels in revealing their backstory in juicy info drops. To engage this player, the book recommends giving them lots of NPCs to interact with, and opportunities to chat with the other PCs during sessions. But it also recommends making sure this player does not dominate the conversation. Next, the Instigator. This is your classic button-pushing, grog, strong-jaw type of player. The book recommends engaging this player by giving them buttons to push, but it also recommends restraint here. Maybe when the Instigator says, "I push the button," pause the action just for a second to give the other players a chance to say, "Oh no you don't." Then, the Power Gamer. In the parlance of our times, we would call this person the dirty phrase min-maxer. This person lives for leveling and battle combos. To engage this player, make sure there are plenty of magic item rewards and obvious goals for missions. But also, don't let this player outshine the others at the table with their perfectly optimized character. And related, the Slayer. Like the Power Gamer but easier to please, the Slayer checks out during RP because they just want to swing that battle axe. Satisfy this player by providing in-game juicy combat, but engage them out of combat too sometimes just by asking them questions. "Hey Killy McKillerson, what would your character like for dinner?" is sometimes enough. Next, the Storyteller. Like the Actor but less self-focused, the Storyteller is the one who probably takes the best notes because they're invested in the world. They want twists and reveals and things happening. Engage this player by tying crunchy sections to story development, but don't let them roleplay for 5 straight minutes when it's their turn in combat. And then we come to the Thinker. They enjoy careful consideration and puzzling out the world. Engage this player by giving them literal puzzles or other problem-solving opportunities, and by making NPC interaction a minigame. If your NPCs have secrets, the Thinker will relish every roleplay scene. But don't let them grind the game to a halt with their inaction. Sometimes, you gotta force the party to just roll dice and then move on. And finally, the Watcher. You know this player. This is the spectator who is happy just to watch the events unfold around them. Engage them by letting them have their quiet space without making them uncomfortable. If and when they decide to come out of their shell, mostly it will be them making that choice, not you. But don't let them be a distraction to the other players. Next, here's a quick tip but a very useful one: passive skill checks. While players love rolling dice, it can sometimes be a slog and slow things down by asking for too many investigation checks, perception checks, insight checks, etc. Keeping your own relevant list of a few skills like Insight, Arcana, Investigation, Deception can really come in handy. Depending on your campaign style and your player's preferred playing style, you'll figure out pretty quickly which ones are going to come up the most often that you need to have at hand. Just record 10 plus their bonus and keep it on a little sheet nearby that you can easily reference when you need to. And like I said, players love rolling dice, but it can sometimes be really cool to reward them for investing in skills. Like when you tell the monk that their passive insight is high enough, they can just tell that the prince is lying about the princess's whereabouts. Or the rogue spotting some traps naturally with a high enough passive investigation. Our third mechanic is about monster rolls, something Matt Colville and crew include in their monster manual alternatives. Giving monsters specific jobs in combat can make it feel really fleshed out and avoid that all the monsters run forward and swing their swords until they're out of hit points problem. The 4th edition lists these roles: Artillery, Brute, Controller, Lurker, minion, skirmisher, and soldier. There's also elites, solos, and leaders, but they're kind of a separate thing, so we're not going to talk about them. Artillery are the ranged combatants. They fire, then run for cover. When played effectively and in the right terrain, goblins are actually a pretty tough opponent because they can hide as a bonus action on their turns. Shoot, then run away, focused on saving their own skins. Next, the Brute. This is your prototypical tank, the creatures designed to take the hits while giving cover for the artillery enemies. Brutes are the most likely to sacrifice their lives for their teammates. Then we have the controller enemies. These are the creatures who have the goal of manipulating the battlefield through area of effect spells, or doing things like positioning themselves to cut off escape routes. These are the more thinky enemies who usually stay back from the front lines. Next, the Lurker. Dog keeps barking. Next, the Lurker. This is your assassin, the one who can go invisible or spends a turn taking the long way around to strike the party from behind. Very deadly, and easy for the PCs to lose track of on the battlefield. Don't put these baddies up against low-level parties. Then we have the Minion. This is the cannon fodder and a monster type that's proved to be a little controversial over the years. If the party has good area of effect spells, like a wizard with a love of fireball, then giving them a group of goblins or kobolds to annihilate will make them feel all warm and fuzzy inside. But if you ask a fighter to spend 4 or 5 melee rounds cutting through that same number of goblins, it can feel like a drag. Just use them with caution and consider letting more powerful PCs do cleave attacks to take down more than one at a time. Next we have the Skirmisher, tanky but less deadly than the Brute and with more mobility. These are the enemies who are determined to rush around the party's front line to attack the squishy sorcerer hiding in the back. Sort of like the Lurker, but more likely to engage in melee. Finally, we have the Soldier, which is a sort of combination of Brute, Controller, and Skirmisher. If your party is only fighting one monster type, the Soldier is the most versatile. They dish out the hits, provide cover, and try to prevent the party from running away. So how do you use all these types? For more complex and tougher battles, throwing a mix of enemies against your party is the key to challenge and fun. If you have artillery bandits with short bows, give them an orc brute up front to provide cover. If you have a couple of soldier types engaging the party, throw in a couple lurkers to use that distraction to attack from behind. If you're fighting in an area with natural choke points, use controllers to seal off the exits so the party can't escape. The party has roles in combat, so the monsters should also have roles, right? Our next rule to steal is a simple one, but I like that the 4th edition DMG actually lists it out, and that's what to do when combat encounters are consistently too easy. It sometimes happens that party symmetry makes them vastly more than the sum of their parts. Or maybe you gave them too strong magic items too early, or maybe they figured out a few unbeatable combos. The book lists concrete options here. More monsters, upgraded monsters, or substituting tougher monsters. More monsters is obvious, just have the sounds of combat attract new, nearby baddies. This can work in most places unless the party somehow knows or you've previously established that there are exactly 11 goblins inside this dungeon. When you're outdoors, it seems reasonable that a passing owlbear might hear the sounds of a scuffle and come check it out. And that's an interesting scenario because the party might not know right away if this is friend or foe. Upgraded monsters is simple too. It's perfectly fine if you decide that these goblins are elite goblins who get multi-attack. Or maybe you replace that orc in the next room with an ogre. Be fair, but remember that challenge is part of the fun. Dog just won't stop barking. The book also recommends altering the terrain to help balance things, like making a dungeon be flooded waist-high with water, then giving the baddies winged boots so they can fly right over it and not be affected by the difficult terrain. Of course, if the party defeats these baddies, make sure they get those winged boots as rewards. Our next tip is about how to link different adventures together. I've seen this in other books, but it's not obvious always how to do it, so let's talk about it here. The book says you can link adventures together by planting the seeds of the next adventure before the current adventure is finished. Seems obvious, right? Let me give you an example in practice. During the first campaign of Wizards and Wordslingers, we started with the Lost Mine of Phandelver set in the Forgotten Realms. When the PCs were approaching the final dungeon, I asked them above table, when this is over, what do you want to do? Do you want to keep on playing these characters in this world and advancing levels, or do you want to start over in a new world with new characters at level 1? They decided unanimously they wanted to keep on playing, and that meant I had to adjust some things. The easiest trick was to make Phandelver's Black Spider not the final boss, but rather a minion of a greater boss. I had picked Storm King's Thunder as the adventure to transition into, and picked the fire giant baddie Duke Zalto to be the spider's boss. Then I started seeding clues about the giant kerfuffle by various NPCs talking about giant sightings and even giant attacks. And when they defeated the Black Spider, they found a letter on him from this boss. It led to the next clue pointing toward the fire giant's plans to locate the rods of the Vanindad so they could complete their enormous kaiju construct. I had said that the Black Spider was actually in Phandalin to investigate whether the Forge of Spells there could be used to reforge their terrifying machine. It was seamless, so when they finished LMOP and started playing STK, they didn't even really know the adventure had changed. Also, I replaced certain NPCs in Storm King's Thunder with NPCs they'd already met from Lost Mine of Phandelver. For example, in STK there's a dragon named Cloth, and I replaced him with Venom Fang from LMOP who they were already familiar with. For the next rule, I just want to show you these useful tables. Go ahead, pause the video so you can take a screenshot. I'll wait. I've made a couple of videos about creating NPCs, so I won't rehash all of that here, but I think these two tables can be incredibly useful if you want to come up with traits and quirks of NPCs on the fly. For example, if the party suddenly decides they're fascinated by that owlin who sells vegetables at the farmer's market for some reason. You know how players are. They always want to engage in deep conversation with the NPC that you least expected. Finally, there's a section in the 4th edition DMG talking about homebrew house rules, and it's worth a mention. There's a line in the book that asks you to ask yourself how necessary the rule is. This is an important consideration and one that's easy to overlook. If you're a game master, there's a good chance you're also a fledgling game designer, right? Even if it's just changing encounters or NPCs, we often want to put our own stamp on things. I've made my own mini-games or house rules because I thought they would enhance the fun or I didn't like a particular rule that already existed. But when considering adding a new mechanic, the question about its necessity is a crucial one to ask. 5th edition D&D has a lot of rules, and half your players don't understand or don't remember half of them half the time. Now consider the effect of asking those same players to remember a bunch of new rules for a tavern drinking minigame that you've designed. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying when considering adding your own rules, give a lot of thought to ease of use. Bounce your homebrew rules off other DMs to ask for how they could be simplified, before springing them on your players. And if you do implement something at your table, seek feedback and don't take it personally if your players hate it. Just take that in stride and move on and do something else that's fun. Our bonus rule here is about skill challenges. I love skill challenges so much I made a whole separate video about them. I'm not going to get into it here because this video is already long enough. And since you're still here, I sure would love a like and subscribe down below if you can spare the click. And with that, I'll mosey on out of here and say that if you can get your hands on a copy of the 4th edition DMG, I absolutely recommend it. It's worth it just for the art alone. This is GM Jim, now go out there and run fun games.